Well, it's great to be here. Finally, a day late for TCDT for STS-121. I'm Steve Lindsay. I'm the commander of the mission. I want to introduce my crew real briefly. All the way on the end, Mike Fossum. He's one of our spacewalkers on his first flight. Mark Kelly, pilot, on his second flight. As Lisa Nowak, also on her first flight, one of our robotic arm operators and our flight engineer. Stephanie Wilson on my left, also on her first flight. Also doing a lot of the robotics works and all of the transfer stuff on the flight. Piers Sellers, another one of our spacewalkers on his second flight. And last but certainly not least, Thomas Reiter from the European Space Agency, German astronaut, actually flew a 6-month Mir mission, and he only paid for a one-way trip, so we're going to leave him up on space station and come back in about a month or so. So anyway, we had a good trip down. It's good to be here. We've rearranged our schedule. We're going to stay an extra day to get everything done down here. We're still planning to do dry count on the same day, and as far as I know, everything's okay. At the end of this week, we have flight readiness review going on, and hopefully at the conclusion of that on Saturday, we'll set a actual launch date. But I am, and my crew, we're all pretty optimistic that early July looks good. So thank you very much for being here. Sorry about the day delay, and I guess we'll see a lot of you tomorrow out at the press conference. Thank you.
Good morning and welcome to the STS-121 Countdown Test Briefing. It's my pleasure to introduce STS-121 Commander Steve Lindsay.
Thank you. It's great to be here this morning, even though we're kind of like a day late, but I guess we're on time for this. Let me introduce my crew just briefly, and then we'll open up for any questions you might have. All the way on the right, Mike Fossum. Mike's on his first flight in class of 1998, and he's one of our spacewalkers. He's called EV2, so he'll be participating in 3 spacewalks, we hope, during the mission. In addition, he does photo TV, does some work on ascent on the flight deck, some post-insertion work, and a whole bunch of other jobs. Next to Mike, Lisa Nowak, also first-time flyer, class of 96. Lisa's our flight engineer on the flight, right up flight deck, ascent and entry, and Lisa's also involved in flying both the shuttle and the station arm extensively all the way throughout the flight. Next to Lisa, Mark Kelly's pilot. Mark's on his second flight, class of 1996. He flew a previous flight up to the space station. Besides being the pilot, Mark's also involved in robotics, and he's also from inside directing the 3 spacewalks we have and working with our 2 EVA crew members is probably his biggest job during the flight. Over on my left side, Stephanie Wilson, class of 1996. She's also on her first flight. Stephanie's on the flight deck on entry, helping out with entry. She's also in charge of transfer and MPLM work and all the Loadmaster activities involved with that. And Stephanie will also be flying both the shuttle and station arm extensively throughout the flight. Next to Stephanie, Piers Sellers, class of 96 on his second flight. He's our lead spacewalker, our EV1. And Piers has been involved in developing and planning and and he'll be leading those spacewalks, which are his primary tasks during the flight. And finally, last but not least, Thomas Reiter, European Space Agency, German Air Force. Thomas flew a mission back in 1995 to Mir, a 6-month mission, so he's highly experienced. He'll be flying up with us, and we're going to drop him off at the space station and pick him up on a future shuttle flight, and he will be bringing the space station crew back up from 2 crew members to 3. So with that, we'll take in any questions you have.
David Waters from News 13 Orlando for Peers. I know we talked briefly there by email about the work. Briefly there about the work put into the external tank and all the workers that have been working on that because their homes were destroyed by Katrina. Tell me how important that was that they got that ready despite all of their loss.
It was enormous. There's no way we could have made the schedule as it is without people going straight back to work after Katrina. So it's a big thank you from everybody on the crew, and I think from JSC to everybody in Michoud for all the heroic sacrifice they made. We're very grateful.
Pat Duggins, WMFE for Stephanie. I was wondering, when astronauts come out for TCTs in the past, it's like they're getting ready for their first mission, but they're thinking, well, I might be able to fly this vehicle again sometime down the road. And since the shuttle is kind of on its downward leg and this might be your only flight, does this make it more poignant for you or what?
Well, I think just like all the other crew members, we try to stay focused on this one mission. And so I really haven't looked very much to the future except to focus on this mission. And we've been training very hard now for 2 years, and so we're just ready to go and execute our mission on Discovery.
Hi, Dan Billow from Channel 2. Let me address this to Mark Kelly. I've heard it said that one of the biggest concerns there is, or one of the worst things you can do with flight hardware is let it sit around, which has been happening for the last 3.5 years or so. With most of the shuttles, Discovery has flown once. Could you address your thoughts about not only all that time sitting on the ground and whether that really is perhaps one of the biggest concerns, and also along with that, your flight controllers and your launch controllers have not had a launch, obviously, except for one time in 3.5 years. Any concerns there?
Well, I think there might be a little bit of truth to that. I mean, machines sometimes do better when they're operating, and now having said that, all the hardware on this vehicle and even some of the stuff that's sitting in the SSPF, the Space Station Processing Facility, that stuff's highly tested. I mean, we spend a lot of man hours and a lot of effort to test every system. This orbiter has been well taken care of for the last year since it landed from 114, and it was went through the flow, and we are very comfortable that it's in perfect condition for flight. With regards to the flight controllers, the level of training they get is similar to what we do. I mean, it's pretty extensive. We handle a lot of malfunctions in training. We spend a lot of hours doing it. And there's a huge effort that goes into getting them ready for flight as much as getting us ready for flight. So I think there's little impact in the fact that we haven't done this for real much in the last 2 years because of the training that the flight controllers get.
Jackie Goddard for the Times and the Sunday Telegraph of London. You obviously all feel very passionately about the importance of manned spaceflight, but we hear still a lot about NASA's financial struggles and the need for more money. Could you give me your thoughts? I was putting this question actually to Dr. Sellers, on whether the US is spending enough on manned and unmanned exploration and whether Britain should be doing more too.
Well, the U.S. is continuing with a program that's been in place for quite a long time, and they're in the process of making the transition from Shuttle to the next vehicle, which is going to take quite a lot of agility. But we're told that the funds will be there to make the next vehicle, so we're pretty optimistic. We're glad that the United Kingdom is involved in the unmanned part of ESA, and we look forward sometime in the future for the UK joining in with the manned program.
Richard Luscombe for the Guardian newspaper. Another question for Dr. Sellers. Given everything that's happened since you were last in space, what have been the most important parts of the build-up to this mission, and what for you has been the most enjoyable part of that build-up?
Well, it's been a very eventful 3 years. You know, the business of getting through Columbia, getting 114 flying, we were all involved in that in one way or another. In terms of, you know, enjoyment, I think the whole business of forming a crew and training together and getting to know each other and working towards a mission, it's all tremendous fun. So it's been very enjoyable for all of us.
Thank you, Tarek Malik with Space.com and Space News, and I have a question for Commander Lindsay or perhaps one of the other crew members. You've had several delays to get to this point here, and the shuttle is on the pad getting ready for launch next week or next month, and I'm curious to know how how does that feel now to be here with the hardware on the pad, looking at an early July launch, and how confident are you in that early target?
Sure. You know, when you're going through it, we've had some delays, from our initial date, launch date, and you work your way up on that training path as you get more and more proficient. You get to handle the more and more complicated challenges, and then we delay and we kind of pull it back and we ramp back up. We went through those, of course, last summer. We were in the final preparations for our flight a year ago before we saw the additional problems with the foam on the tank, and so. We backed off a little bit. We've been pushing it back up for the, since then, and I think we've peaked out. We've our last sims we've gone through. I won't say we're perfect, but we're as good as we're going to get. And it's gone great. We're really ready, and it's exciting to be here, within sight of the launch pad at last.
Kevin Oliver with WFTV, the ABC station in Orlando. I guess for any of the crew members, do you feel any more butterflies being here just 2 weeks, I guess, before, a little more than 2 weeks before the launch?
It does finally seem real this time, and not so much nervous butterflies, but excited ones. We're out here looking at the pad and seeing a real vehicle all set up, ready to go, and we're very, very excited, especially for me on my first time. I can't wait to go.
Todd Halverson of Florida Today for either Steve Lindsay and or any of the first timers who want to chime in. Can you talk about the value of the terminal countdown demonstration test, especially for the first time flyers, and how big a milestone it is in your launch campaign?
Well, Lisa just mentioned just being down here, seeing the vehicle on the pad, and seeing everybody real excited about it, and doing the events that you do in TCDT is a milestone for us, and it makes it all seem very, very real, because the vast majority of our training happens at Johnson Space Center in Houston, where we're in simulators. Well, this is, if you look behind us, this is definitely not a simulator. And so just standing down here, the training we get here is invaluable. We learn to drive the tank in an emergency. We learn how to operate these slide wire baskets that we're kind of standing down at the base of, and the bunker system. And then the actual launch dry count that we'll do tomorrow, we'll go through the entire process just like we would on a normal launch day. We'll get up in the morning, have a quick breakfast, get a weather brief, get into our suits, get our suits checked, come out to the pad, get strapped into the vehicle in a vertical, which is the only time we get to ever do that prior to launch. There's only one other time during our entire flow we actually get in our real vehicle, and that's during a crew equipment interface test that happened a month and a half or 2 months ago. So to get out, get in the vehicle in the vertical, get a feel for what the vehicle looks like, because it's close to the simulator, but it's not exactly like the simulator. It's a little bit different. And then get a chance to egress out of there and see what that feels like, and how to do that. It's really invaluable training for us, and since you always come back, the TCDT is a real enjoyable week for us, because it's not quite as intense as a normal training week in Houston. And but then when we go back from TCDT, we know that we're really, really close, and we're getting close to the end. So this event, more than any other, probably makes it feel like to us that it's real, it's really time to go, and we're really about ready to go. So it's an exciting time this is my 4th time doing it, and I still get excited at TCDT.
Pat Duggan again, WMFE for Steve. We haven't even had the FRR yet, and already the tea leaf reading has begun as far as when is the most likely launch date for you all. What are your feelings on that? Maybe July 1st a little bit too ambitious, take a couple of days, cross the T's, dot the I's, that sort of thing?
Well, I could get myself in real trouble talking about this. because I've been telling the crew that I'm guaranteeing July 1st, but as I get told at home, I'm quite often wrong. But I seriously, looking at technically what's going on with the vehicle, the issues we've been working through, the issues that are coming up on flight readiness review, I don't know of anything out there right now. There are a couple of controversial issues that could push it a couple of days maybe, but I don't really know of anything out there that would preclude a July 1st launch. So I'm very optimistic that we're going to shoot for early July, as early in that window as we can get. And so I personally wouldn't be at all surprised if we end up with around July 1st, something very, very close to that.
Jackie Goddard for the Times of London again. I'm sure you're all fed up talking about ice frost ramps, but I just wanted to ask you, how big an issue are the ice frost ramps to you all still, and how difficult a decision has it been for you to accept that you can fly with that risk?
Well, the ice frost ramps have been going on for quite a while. The program, and everybody recognizes that the current ice frost ramp design is a problem and is something we want to change. We looked at a couple of changes to those ice frost ramps in the wind tunnel, and the changes didn't prove to be what we wanted them to be, or better than the current design. We did put the current design in the wind tunnel recently, and it did, although we had small pieces of foam come off, they did pass, and they were of acceptable levels. So when we looked at the data, when I've looked at the data, I kind of concluded that at this point it'd probably be smarter to fly with the current ice frost ramps as opposed to new ice frost ramps. And so I actually agreed with the decision that the program made regarding those ice frost ramps. There certainly is risk with flying these ramps, just like almost everything else on the shuttle that we fly, and we're just accepting that risk. But I think at this point in time, it's the best we have. And I know the program's working hard to change out those ramps, but by removing the protuberance air load ramp, which is a huge aerodynamic change, if we had to change the ice frost ramps on top of that, now we have two huge aerodynamic changes right next to each other. We think it's more prudent to make a big change, go flight test it, which is where we are now, and then see how those results look before we make the next change. So we're okay with the decision as it stands.
David Waters from Central Florida News 13 again. For any one of the first-time flyers, what are your thoughts? Let's talk about the just basic human sleep pattern. What is it going to be like for you going to sleep the night before launch? Do you think you're going to get any sleep? And what about the first time you were in space? Do you think that's going to be tough for you? You're going to be staying up a little past when you're supposed to?
Certainly, we're very excited, and so it might be hard to sleep just before launch. But I'm sure once we get on orbit and get into a routine, we'll try to be as rested as we can. Certainly, right after the main engine's cut off, it's a busy day. That's first flight day, but we're going to have to fight the urge to look out the window and to be in awe and to really get down to the business of the work that we have for the mission. But I'm hoping that maybe about the third day or so we'll calm down and be able to sleep.
Hi, Mike Schneider with the Associated Press. I understand that you all are having dinner Thursday night with Administrator Mike Griffin. I was wondering what you plan to tell the agency's top guy face-to-face, and are you going to share any concerns you have with him about the program in general?
Well, I'm not sure if that's a done deal that we're going to do that, but we will meet with him before we fly, I'm sure. As far as issues to share with him, we've talked to him before. I've talked to him before, and one thing I really appreciate about Mike Griffin is you always know what he's thinking. I think when he talks to you, you guys know what he's thinking, and we do too. So there aren't any surprises. I think he knows what we're thinking. He encourages us to talk to him about it too. So I don't know if we have any specifics we're going to talk about, or we're just going to have dinner and have a good time. So I don't know. I guess I better talk to my crew and see if they have any issues, so at least I'll know about it before they bring them up.
Hi, Bill Harwood with CBS. I guess at the PRCB last week, they did, Wayne, I guess, decided that July 1st is okay from a lighting constraint, that ET-SEP photography is desired but not mandatory. What are they telling you that you will be able to see on the 1st? And is that the right way to think about it? I mean, obviously the program does desirable versus mandatory, but it seems like you would want those pictures if you could get them.
And I asked some questions about the lighting, and it's my understanding that the lighting issue that came up to say delay a couple of days to get better lighting in the ice frost ramp is not a done deal that would improve things. And the reason being is
I think the lighting analysis was done with the external tank separating and being a perfect attitude and perfect orientation with no tip-off rates. In other words, it's not going to tumble at all. Well, every flight I've ever been on, when the ET comes off, it starts tumbling, usually slowly, but it starts tumbling because you get a little bit of venting that comes off the tank as you separate. So just because you delay 3 or 4 days is no guarantee that you're going to get good lighting on those ice frost ramps. So what our guidance is, we have changed the way we do the handheld ET photography, and basically as soon as the engine's cut off, I have a couple of people jumping out of their seats, grabbing cameras, and heading up the flight deck to get that. The primary means of collecting data on that tank at ETSEP are the umbilical well cameras that are digital cameras installed, and we'll downlink those later. So as far as what we'll really see in terms of the ramps, I don't think anybody really knows. And I think that the reason it became a desirable thing was because of the tip-off ramps and the unpredictability of what you'll actually be able to see. So I think it was a good decision. There was no guarantee that waiting 2 or 3 days would yield us any better results than if we go on the first.
Richard Luskin for The Guardian. A quick question for the 2 European-born astronauts. Are you soccer fans? Have you been following the World Cup? And will you be able to follow the tournament when you're in space?
Well, to date, I've had the opportunity to at least get the results of some of the games, certainly of my home country, Germany, the first match. The second is coming up. I'm sure I will get at least the results and maybe some kind of wrap-up maybe this evening. But I'm pretty sure that Piers and I will follow the results up there. We unfortunately won't have the chance to follow it live, which would be great, but it's part of, well, it's a major game in Europe, and people are excited about it, and so are we.
And he's right. He's a Germany fan, I'm an England fan, and we're both backup Brazil fans, because, you know, that's a safe bet.
Hi, Kurt Loff, Tampa Tribune. Commander, is there a sense of urgency among all the astronaut corps to complete the space station?
I'm not exactly sure how to take the question. There is a sense among the agency that we need to get, and the office, is that we want to build station. We have a 2010 retirement date of the shuttle. Most of the elements we have that need to go up can only go up on the shuttle. So we certainly want to get that station built so we can get the maximum amount of science out of it before the shuttles go away. We recognize that the shuttle retirement date is a hard date, and we want to meet that date. But I don't think there's a sense of urgency in terms of we're going to rush to flight to deal with that, just because we know that every time we fly, it's got to go right. It's got to go well. We've got to do the right thing, and we don't want to take any unnecessary risk to do that. So it's always a trade. You know, there's been a lot of talk about schedule pressure in the last 3.5 years, and you know, schedule pressure is real, and it's true in any organization. It's true on any project, and there's nothing wrong with schedule pressure as long as it's balanced properly against the other issues. And what we try to do is strike a balance between those things: the urgency to get the station built, the schedules we try to keep, versus doing the right thing regarding both the station and the shuttle. So it's constantly a balancing act between those things, and that's what we try to hold on to.
Thank you, Commander Lindsay and crew. There are no more questions from the media.
Thanks for coming.
All right. So, picture? I guess I better move. We'll continue to stand in the color here. Because I look solid. I like it.
Well, we just finished our last event. We did a payload bay walk down this morning and looked over the payloads, which is always fun to do in the vertical. Seeing them all installed in the orbiter really for the first time for us, and all that went well. We had a real good dry count yesterday and learned a lot. Got to exercise stuff we really hadn't exercised in a year, and us as a crew got to train all that and look at that and understand how the launch count works and work with the great folks down here at Kennedy Space Center. Vehicle looks great. Everything looks ready. Of course, the big thing going on today and tomorrow is the flight readiness review, and we actually had a chance this morning to go into that and talk to those folks for a few minutes before we headed out to the pad, and looks like they're ready to go. They have a long day ahead of them, and we, like you, are looking forward to hearing the results of that review. So we have just a couple of minutes, and if you have any questions, go ahead. Phil.
Hi, Steve. It's Bill Harwood, CBS. You mentioned the flight readiness review. I know one of the topics is going to be DVR, of course.
Yes.
So to ask you one last ice cross ramp question, I swear.
Okay. You promise.
There's some stuff that's going to end up being officially classified on the risk matrix as probably catastrophic, and that's over the life of the program if you didn't make a change, obviously.
Right.
And you obviously are, but
yes.
I don't think the vehicle's ever flown with a classification like that. I just wonder what your thoughts are about how that risk matrix plays out. Maybe it's just semantics or whatever, but what you would tell people that makes you think it's simplified.
Well, I think, and I've heard the same thing, and I don't know for sure. I wasn't involved in the meetings. Like yesterday, they had a meeting about it, and I'm sure they're going to talk about it today. So I don't know exactly where it's going to be classified. I think one of the things, though, that the managers especially wanted to do was to make sure that everybody in the program recognizes this as our top risk, and I think they wanted to put it up. I think they wanted to put it up there to enunciate it as, hey, this thing is something we have to fix, and this thing is something we really have to watch. So they're kind of stratifying it to separate it from all the other risks that are out there to make sure that everybody's aware of that. In terms of the actual risk of flying with the ice frost ramp, just because you put it in that category doesn't change the risk at all. Technically, it's the same situation we had before. And there is also, I know for a fact, there's a significant amount of debate within the community as to where that really should be. There's a group that thinks it should be up there. There's a group that thinks it should be one block down, or a little less amount of a risk. For us, with the ice frost ramp, we've flown with them. We've seen pieces come off of them, but not large pieces that would cause damage to the orbiter. We know it's a risk. What we have on this flight, just like we had on 114, is we have sensors, and if one of those pieces does come off and it poses a hazard, we are going to see it, and we will know about it, and we have many, many methods that you all know about to do that. And we have strategies to deal with it if we do take damage. We have limited repair capabilities. We have, in the last resort, a safe haven capability on space station. So it doesn't change my perspective of where we are with the ice frost ramps. Technically, it's the same story as it was before. I still think that putting a big power ramp change on the orbiter and topping it out with an ice frost ramp change, there's this thing in the flight test world and in the engineering world called the law of unintended consequences. Is when you make a change, you often influence other things that you never expected to do. And every time we make a big change, we're taking that risk. And you can't drive it to zero, you try to minimize it. So I'm pretty content that we've done everything we can in the wind tunnel with these ice frost ramps as well as the power ramp changes. And we know as much as we can know on the ground, and we can't know more about these ice frost ramps and instrument them and get data to know how to change them unless we go to flight test. And I think that's where we are right now. Yes, sir.
Stephen Young with Spaceflight Now. After the Challenger and the Columbia accidents, crews have often said that this will now be the safest shuttle we've ever flown. Do you and your crew feel the same way about this mission?
The way I've always felt about each shuttle mission that I've been on is I believe we're doing everything to make it as safe as we possibly can to fly. And I believe that's the case with this shuttle as the other shuttles I've flown on. The safest we've ever flown is a qualitative term, and I'm not really sure what it means, because when you make changes and you do something for the first time, my experience, I was a test pilot. Mike was a flight test engineer before we were here, and we participated in a lot of flight tests. And interestingly enough, the kind of work I did was a lot of weapons tests and separation testing, which is very similar to what we're getting ready to do on the shuttle with this launch, where you go into the wind tunnel and you do all kinds of testing and analysis, and you do computational fluid dynamics. You come up with a model, you estimate that you have a good one, and then you go out and flight test. And my experience from actually doing the flight test is probably 95% of the time things go exactly as you expect, and about 5% of the time they don't. So that's the nature of the flight test business, and so I can't tell you that this is the safest flight we've ever flown. I can tell you that we're making it as safe as we possibly can to go fly within the resources that we have available to do that, and I'm confident in that. So like I said, whether it's the safest ever flown, I think that's a relative term, and it's kind of, I can't say. Yes, sir.
Would you discuss a little bit the debate that's probably is going on with flight readiness review in terms of pushing and pull? We want to get off the ground soon because the answer flight is August 28th, and we can have a couple of days to do the turnaround. And yet there may be some issues where we're pushing towards delaying a few days, such as the lighting and the tank separation.
Yeah, I think that particular discussion will get a very fair shake in the flight readiness review. Slipping a couple of days for ice frost ramps for lighting, I think has less to do with the turnaround for the next flight than it has to do with if we delay a couple of days, will we really get better lighting or not? And they ended up classifying it as a highly desirable to do that. But the lighting on the ice frost ramps, from my understanding, it kind of depends on the orientation of the tank when we separate. When the tank comes off, we fire some pyro-explosive jettison system. Tank comes off, we fire some reaction control jets to separate away from the tank. And when the tank comes off, the fuel lines disconnect, and so you get jets firing into the tank. You have these pyros firing with maybe not all the same force, and then you also have venting occurring from these lines that have just been disconnected, low hydrogen oxygen venting. All those things can produce rates on this tank, and the times I've flown before, when the tank comes off and we get up to take photographs of it, it tends to be moving slightly, just kind of tipping or rotating and changing attitude. All of that will affect, and what we're worried about is shadowing on the ice frost ramps. But if you think about it, if it doesn't come off perfect, then the shadowing is going to be different than what we predict, and it's very difficult to predict that shadowing. So, one of the issues has been with that discussion is, if we delay a couple of days, is it really going to bias anything in terms of lighting? And so I think the program direction has kind of been, we're not sure it's worth it to wait a couple of days if it's really not going to bias anything. So that's where we are. Obviously, we want to get good imagery on that ice frost ramp, the ice frost ramp area, but we will have cameras on it on ascent, and we'll have good imagery of it then. And I suspect even with shadowing, we'll get pretty good imagery of that area. Yes. I'm not sure about launch day. We're going to go to quarantine in just over a week, and we'll sit down in quarantine and have a long crew meeting. Sorry, Mike, I don't know if you knew about that. And we'll talk about a whole bunch of stuff that, especially for the first-time flyers to think about, and just kind of a refocusing of where we are, what we're getting ready to do, what our priorities are, how to work through. It's kind of like a sprint, but it's also a marathon when you're up there. We have to watch cumulative fatigue as we deal with a very challenging timeline and things like that. So we'll talk about a lot of that on launch day. We'll do a little bit of talking, not a lot. Actually, you get up and you have breakfast and you get suited up and you're out and you're in the vehicle very, very quickly. So we don't have a lot of time. But this crew is ready. We're ready. We have a little bit more, couple sims next week, but very little, and we're ready to go. And I think we've said probably about everything we need to at this point. Yes, sir. Oh, just said hello, introduced my crew, and thanked them for all the work and the very long, painful meeting they were about to go into. And one thing I said was that I really appreciate. You look around the room, and I knew, probably three-quarters of the folks in that room, and they've been around NASA for a long time. And one thing that's unique about each and every one of them, regardless of which side you are on the ice frost ramp story or any of the other issues, they're very passionate and they really believe in what they're doing. They're all engineers. They're all very, very technically capable, and they're passionate about what they do. And we all believe in the same thing. We believe in human spaceflight. We believe in getting the shuttle off and getting it airborne and doing things safely and getting station built and going on with exploration. And every person in that room is passionate about that. They're not in there doing it for the money. They're in there doing it because they believe in what we're doing, as we all do. And so I thank them for that, because no matter how heated the argument may or may not get in there today, they're all passionate about it, they all believe it, and they're all going after the same goal. They just may have a different view on what's technically the best way to accomplish that. Yes, sir. All of those things. Why don't you answer that, Mike?
You bet. I'll give that a try. I think, for me, this is, it's been a dream for an awful lot of years, and it's finally coming true. And so I've gone through this mentally many, many times, and we've gone through the training. And when we were strapping in yesterday, we're starting to crawl in. Steve said, "Okay, guys, just like the simulator, no sweat." And so for me, I'm ready. I've been thinking about this for a long time. My family is kind of catching up to them, and so we spend some time talking about it. And every chance I get, we're watching NASA Select on TV and saying, "Okay, here's what Dad's doing," as we go through that to kind of explain all of these things. And so they understand a lot about it, but it's now, becoming much more real to them. And so just help them get on board to understand what Dad's about to go do.
And I think, I think it's a lot harder on our families than it is on us when we go to fly, because we go and we get ready, we train hard, come out in launch week. As soon as we launch, we are just working nonstop, and that's all we're thinking about. But the families are not. They're thinking about us. So I think it's harder on them, and we recognize that, and we try to make it as as easy as we can on them, although we're sometimes difficult people to deal with, I suppose. We have time for one more question, then we have to get on an airplane. Yes, sir. Well, that's one of our primary objectives on the flight, is to go fix the test reel and get that other one operational. Right now, we can't move. We need the test reel fixed to be able to move the mobile transporter, because on subsequent flights, we need to be able to move the space station arm to different places on the truss to be able to assemble more pieces of the truss on board. So it's an absolutely critical event. We've trained for it since January, I guess, is when we found out it was going to be on our flight. Mike and Piers especially have trained in replacing the IUAs, the electrical boxes, where the guillotine cut the cable. We think we have a good plan to change that out. We'll actually get one of those changed out on the first EVA, which should allow us to be able to translate that mobile transporter to get in place for the second EVA. And on the second EVA, we're going to change out the other broken IUA, the electrical interface box, and then we're going to change out the test reel. It's a complex task. It's a complex EVA task, but it is necessary to pick up a second string or a redundant path to be able to power that as we translate it. So it's a very critical task. Mike and Piers have worked really hard on it, and the engineering folks have done a lot of development work to make sure we're ready to do it. So it's critical that we get it done, and it's one of our highest priority objectives.
If I could add just briefly, right now we cannot move the mobile transporter. The very first thing we do on EVA 1 is to go up and secure the cutting mechanism on the top, the Zenith IUA. As soon as we do that and get the cable reinstalled in the block there, get it secured, we will be able to move the MT again. So at that point, we've recovered single string capability. We don't like working with it much that way, but we're not stuck anymore. So getting the test reel changed out is real important to get the redundancy back so that we can move it with confidence.
Thank you all.
Good afternoon and welcome to the post-flight readiness review press conference. I'm Dean Acosta. We're here to talk about the last 2 days and talk about our launch date, and we'll get started with that shortly. To my left is the Administrator of NASA, Dr. Michael Griffin. To his left, Associate Administrator for Space Operations, Bill Gerstenmaier. To his left, we have Shuttle Program Manager, Wayne Hale. And to his left, we have NASA Launch Director Mike Leinbach. I will ask that we'll have some opening remarks, and then I ask that we'll go around the room and have some questions and answers. I ask that you identify yourselves and who you're asking your question to, and also that at the end of the press conference, that will be the end of the press conference, and ask that you respectfully not come up and continue the press conference. So I appreciate that. All right, we'll go ahead and start with opening remarks from the Administrator.
Well, thanks, Dean, and thanks all of you for being here today. We had fully 2 days of a very intensive flight readiness review for STS-121. I'm sure you knew that it would be, and that it would be a very intensive and spirited exchange, and that's what we had. Of course, following last year's mission, when we had certainly an unplanned loss of a large piece of foam, and we've spent a year since that time almost getting ready for this flight, trying to understand what, even better, what causes foam to come off and how we can keep it from coming off. You'll hear that there were many different viewpoints on the issue of whether we were ready to fly or not. We've decided that we are. Gerst will tell you all about that. But it was one of the most open and yet non-adversarial sets of discussions that I've seen since returning to NASA. It's the way we should function, and it's the way we did function. I'm very proud of the people who pulled all this together, and I'm very pleased that I was able to be part of it.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Mike. Again, it was a tremendously good review, and the fact that we were very thorough in all the subjects we covered and talked about. I think you'll tend to want to talk more about the foam and some of the ice frost ramps and other things, but I think it's important to realize that we spent a lot of time in this review talking about a lot of other issues to make sure that we're really ready to go fly. You know, sometimes it's the things that we think we understand that we really don't understand that can cause us the most problems. So we were really careful in this review to make sure that we talked about everything as thoroughly as we could. We reviewed everything as much as we could to make sure we are really ready to go fly. And I think we just had a very, very good discussion with all the folks involved. Obviously, the ice frost ramps was one of the vigorously debated topics. In the end, in the poll, we had essentially two members, safety and the chief engineer, who very similar in the last ice frost ramp discussions were both no-go, or the recommendation was not to fly from their position, but they do not object to us flying, and they understand the reasons and the rationale that we laid out in the review for flight, and I think we're good to go with that. And again, they understand the position, they understand where they are, but from their particular disciplines, they felt that they wanted to be their statement to be no-go, and they put essentially a little written statement in their go criteria of what exactly they meant by being ready to go launch. I think the other thing that came out very strongly during this is we really have a mission to go do with the space station. It's going to be exciting, increasing the crew size to 3. We talked a lot about the criteria of what we would do to leave the third crew member on board space station. We'd look forward to the other shuttle flights to make sure we have a ride home for them in return. We have contingency plans in case the shuttle flights slip or delayed. We reviewed that in a lot of detail. We also spent a lot of time looking at the contingency shuttle crew support capability. That's the ability to keep crew on board station if there's a problem with the shuttle. And we have plenty of overlap. The station is in very good shape from an oxygen generation standpoint, a carbon dioxide removal standpoint. Most critical consumable on station is oxygen, but it looks very good, and we look very good having a good sound and solid launch on need. We also reviewed the tile repair techniques, and those have made great progress since the last flight on STS-114. And I think we also spent a lot of time looking at the models and the transport of debris potentially back into the orbiter. And again, those models have also been dramatically improved. I'd like to show you 2 slides, if I could, right now, if we can call those up. First of all, this is the external view of the external tank. You'll see on this view that where the ice frost ramps are, there's 13 up on the LO2 side, there's 7 on the inner tank region, and there's 17 down at the back. The little numbers next to them are the stations. Each one of them may be slightly different than the others. They're not all created equal, and they run up and down the tank. Next chart. This is what we've seen in the past in terms of the top 10 LH2, and that's the lower portion of the tank, ice frost foam ramp losses. This is fully what we expect to see potentially on STS-121 when we get some of our external tank photography back. We expect to see losses in these regions pretty much similar to what we've seen here. We've designed to these plus some margin, so we have good capability to accept what we've seen in the past historically plus a margin. But this is what we expect to see. So when we see this in flight and you get this data down, we should not be surprised. We need to go, it's a function of when the foam comes off, it's a function of the mass, and it's a function of the area. So again, I just wanted to kind of set the precedence of where we're setting overall with what we expect to see on STS-121. And again, it was a very good review. We have an awesome team working together. And lastly, we set the launch date of July 1st, and we're ready to go for July 1st. And Wayne?
Well, I guess I wanted to just make a comment on the human element here. As I was sitting in the flight readiness review, thinking how different this has been from flight readiness reviews that I went to before the accident. There was so much engagement from so many people. There were folks that perhaps in the old days, maybe not them personally, but their organizations had never asked questions, would never participated in discussion, would have gone out in the hall after the meeting and said, well, I don't get why it's okay to go fly. I really didn't understand the rationale for that. We had everyone engaged. It was a huge room full of people. I think that room holds about 250 people. It was full. There was overflow rooms provided. And I think we answered questions from all comers. Now, at the end of the day, some people still have reservations, and they expressed those reservations. And I think that is a great step forward from where we were some time ago in the past. So I think that those folks that were concerned about the culture change in the Space Shuttle program or NASA in general ought to take heart because of this huge change in the way that people participate and are willing to ask questions. And I'm pleased to say the folks that those questions are asked to are willing to engage and respond with a discussion that's understandable and not just some short comments. So I think the agency has really changed. I think maybe it's gone back to the way it was a quarter century ago or more, and that bodes well for the future. Right?
Okay. Thanks, Wayne. I'd like to report a little bit on the processing of the vehicle now. Out at the launch pad, Discovery's processing is going extremely well. We're not tracking any technical issues at the current time that would prohibit launch. We have two major activities left to go before we get into our launch countdown. One is our ordnance installation, which will pick up Sunday, tomorrow, and conclude on Monday. Then we begin closing out the after the orbiter, preparing for launch countdown. Launch countdown starts on Wednesday the 28th, leading to a T0 on July the 1st of about 3:43 Eastern Time afternoon. We have 5 days of contingency left in that schedule, so from a processing perspective out the launch pad, things are going really, really well. We see no reason we couldn't get to July 1st from our perspective. Meanwhile, over in the orbiter processing facility, everything on Atlantis' processing goes well. In the event that we need to call her up for a rescue mission, no issues over there. That flow is being paced by the external tank processing, but the tank is going well. We should mate the tank the first week in July. And so we're in good shape on Discovery at the pad and in good shape with Atlantis as well. Everything's going fine.
Thanks, Mike. That'll do it for our opening remarks. We'll start with questions and answers, and we'll go to Jay Barbary to start us off.
This is Jay Barbary with NBC for whoever wants to take it. I understand that some doctors, flight surgeons raised some question about Thomas Ryder as far as his accumulation of radiation, and there was some talk about possibly removing him, putting the backup. Did any of that come up today, or anyone know what I'm talking about, Wayne?
That's not one that I'm familiar with.
So,
There was no discussion in the FRR, and Thomas Ryder's fully ready to go fly.
okay, thank you.
All right, next question. Let's go to Bill.
Bill Harvey, CBS, with one for Wayne and one for the administrator. You said at the DVR news conference that in your personal opinion, the ice frost ramp should be probable catastrophic on that integrated risk matrix. did it stay there, and can you define that for us wherever it ended up? And for the administrator, if you had some dissent, which you're encouraging in this environment, but if you have a system that some folks think, by whatever definition standards you guys have in place, is potentially catastrophic, how do you explain to people why, in aftermath of the CABE report and all that, that you're good to go fly?
I'll let Wayne go, and then I'll answer your question. All right, let's see. My observation coming out of the debris verification review that there was considerable uncertainty on the failure mechanism. We understand that these cracks that are caused by the thermal mismatch of thick foam on top of the underlying foam can cause debris to liberate. That clearly was the cause, approximate cause of the PAL ramp loss we saw in the last flight. And it's intuitively obvious that that can lead to debris. What we don't have a really good handle on is the connecting the dots on the physics to understand exactly why and how that comes off. So our folks that have been studying on that for some time now and run a number of tests, dissected inch by inch, actually eighth of an inch by eighth of an inch, the foam on the one tank that we had down here and loaded twice last year, have come up with a pretty good understanding, but we still can't connect all those dots. So any numbers that you might hear or analysis that you might hear has got a considerable uncertainty band on it. In my mind, and I think in almost everybody's mind, this is dealing with the foam that's around the ice frost ramps, because it has the propensity to do some of these activities that Bill showed you the picture of. It's got to be our number one item to take care of. And in fact, I have turned on a Tiger team to go design in rapid but thorough fashion a fix that will eliminate that hazard. And it's not ready now. And for reasons that I think I've explained a couple of times before, we're going to go fly anyway. So I put those right at the top of our risk chart, which means that I feel as program manager, those issues needed to be elevated to senior NASA management, agency management, for their review and disposition. I believe that they are in an unacceptable level for the program manager to take that risk on by himself, and that's what I understand when I recommended we put those at the top of the chart. It is certainly something that from an agency level I think is an acceptable risk. I recommended to the administrator and to Bill Gerstenmaier that even though we did rate these very high, I think it is acceptable for a number of reasons to go fly for a limited number of flights where we come up with a redesign. So that's where we rated it. I will tell you that it was an interesting discussion, and engineers can argue over words more than English majors can. And I was reminded of Dr. Diane Vaughn's book when she talked about how process-oriented engineers are. The argument about the process and the definition of words and exactly how you do this has gone on for probably 6 weeks now, and culminated in our discussions today.
I guess the way I would answer the question, or the question you addressed to me, is that I'm not concerned with what box in the matrix we're in, because that's a matter of terms and definitions. In point of fact, I don't agree with the way that we've categorized that risk as being probable. Because if it's going to be probable, then that means that over some reasonable span of flights, I would expect to see evidence of that behavior. We can, as statisticians, go off and argue about what percentage of the time you would expect to see it, but if we say probable, we mean that over some reasonable span of activity, we should see it, and I won't, at this point, refine it further. Now, in fact, we have 114 flights with this vehicle, with these ice frost ramps under our belt, and while we've had 2 loss of vehicle incidents, they've not been due to ice frost ramps. So I have a great deal of trouble believing that a statistically sound statement would be to say that this is a probable event to be seen over the next 16 flights.
I just have trouble with that. Now, without regard to the label, so getting past the label, the concern then is, do we in fact think that if we fly this ice cross ramp the way it is for some very small, not 16, but some very small number of flights, a few, until we have a better design. And let me be the first to lead the parade in saying we'd like to have a better design. But we want to know that it is a better design, and we want to take our time with it. So the question is, can we fly a few times with this ice cross ramp without probably incurring a hazard? And based on the data that I have seen, I believe that we can. I believe that our models are quite conservative. I believe that our models have a huge variance in them. We really don't know as much about these phenomena as we would like to, because if we believed our models, we would believe that we had a worse problem than our flight data is showing, which is a red flag to indicate that we don't understand as much as we would like to understand. And we, as Bill likes to say, we need to continue to be hungry. We need to continue to dig out the information that the vehicle is telling us. But we need to fly it to dig it out. So how do I justify that? With as much uncertainty as we have, I would admit to you that I don't know how the decision would come out, but I certainly would have to think harder about putting a crew on this vehicle if I thought we didn't have the space station safe haven, the CSCS option, and the launch on need option, and for that matter, if push came to shove, the availability to call up Russian Soyuz spacecraft for rescue. I do not see the situation we're in as being a crew loss situation. This isn't if we are unlucky and we have a debris event on ascent, it will not impede the ascent. The crew will arrive safely on orbit, and then we will begin to look at our options, whether those include repair, launch on need, extended safe haven on the station, asking our Russian partners for help. It may be some or all of the above. We would have decisions to make, but we would have time to make those decisions. We are not in the situation that we were in with Columbia, where we didn't know that we had a problem. We know we have a problem. We are elected to take the risk. We do not believe we're risking crew. There is a programmatic risk, without doubt. If we have another major incident in launching a space shuttle, I would not wish to continue with the program. We're going to use this flight and the subsequent flights to complete the space station. That's what we want to do with the shuttle over the next 4 years. We're going to complete the space station. We believe it's possible to do so. But if it is going to be possible to do so, we're going to have to take some programmatic risks, because the shuttle will be retired in 2010. This president's budget will not carry funding for vehicles, shuttle vehicles, beyond 2010. So if we're going to fly, we need to accept some programmatic risk and get on with it. And I wish to, again, I'll point out, for me to accept programmatic risk to do this, in the spirit of answering your question, is not the same as accepting a crew risk, which we believe we are not doing. Thanks. That was a good question.
All right, let's go with Mike Schneider.
Mike Schneider, Associated Press, had a question for Dr. Griffin. What were the specific objections to the members from the safety office, and also what did you tell them to try and sway them if you did? And then if it was a hand pull, how close was it when you went around the room pulling everybody?
Well, I'll answer my part. I'm going to let Gerst answer about the polling. I wasn't actually keeping track. First of all, I didn't try to sway anybody. Let me make another point that seems to have been lost over the years. NASA gets lots of advice. We get a lot of external advice. Advisors advise. The administrator, whoever he is in whatever era, has the obligation to decide. That's what I do. We get a lot of advice internally to the internally to NASA to the program. The program and the mission director, Bill Gerstenmaier, have to, at some level, decide, and at some level, if the issue gets big enough, it comes up to me. Our staff offices, the Office of Safety and Mission Assurance and Office of Chief Engineer, and indeed our entire engineering and flight safety organizations, have the right, have the obligation, have the utter necessity to tell us exactly what they think. But all of that is advice. The chief engineer, the chief of safety and mission assurance, no one else except for the administrator is the administrator. Unfortunately or unfortunately, in this particular time, that's me. So I'm not trying to persuade people. I'm trying to listen as carefully as I can to everything that is being said to me. I try to integrate it all as best I can. I make a decision, and then I explain to people what the rationale for that decision was, because if I have any holes or flaws in my logic, I want to hear about them. In fact, I desperately want to hear about them. The discussion that you heard earlier about that since the day I walked into this position, I have said that we need to regain a culture of openness and a culture of willingness to engage in technical discussion on the merits without it having an adversarial component to it. We did that. Everybody, if there was anybody in that room who didn't get to have their say, you're going to have to go and search them out, because it was a great 2 days. And at the end, I have to decide, and you have our decision.
Can I answer the polling question? Yeah, and I guess in terms of the polling, I polled all the Flight Readiness Review Board members, and with the exception of the two I mentioned, they were all go for flight with the understanding of where we are. And I think if you kind of boil down to where we are, it's a difficult situation because we have data that shows we have potentially cracks underneath large foam that's put on top of other foam. And we have flight history that doesn't show that we lose a lot of foam. I mean, I showed you the pictures. They look dramatically not very good, but in reality, those are not a real threat to the orbiter. They're what we see in those history pictures that I showed you. So the dilemma is, how can we not rule out that at some point in the future we're not going to have some larger foam loss with this underlying problem? And that therein lies the debate. You know, what has kept us, we can't figure out the theory that can explain to us why we haven't had larger foam loss with this underlying crack. There's obviously something we think that's protecting us physically in the physics of the situation, but we don't know what that is. And what we discussed as an engineering team is what the pros and cons of that are. We looked at statistical models, we looked at transport models, we discussed all of this as a team. And it was a great discussion. I mean, I got to listen to all the guys explain to me how the models work, where our physics-based model works, how we understand what we don't understand. Folks would bring up differing points. There wasn't a united engineering position on this. I mean, it was very, very depending on who you talk to in the room. And in fact, it's very inappropriate to say all engineers agreed with one position and all managers agreed with another. That was not the case. It was a very good discussion. And then, as Mike said, we laid out our rationale for the decision to go fly, and really no one objects with the decision to go fly. You know, to both the safety office and the chief engineer, their point was they recommend being no-go, but they don't object to us going to fly. So again, I think it was a good discussion overall. It was healthy. And it's a difficult situation to be where we are. If we knew a better fix, if we could put a better fix on this tank, we would all put a better fix on this tank and go. The problem is, without understanding this underlying failure phenomenon that I described to you, any fix we put on has some risk associated with it of losing foam or generating ice. We can control that as much as we can through design, but we can't eliminate that. So in a sense, we almost need to go fly to gain some more data. We have non-destructive evaluations of the ice frost ramps. We know there's some defects in those ice frost ramps to begin with. We'll get a chance to see how those perform. We have some new cameras, which if we get lucky during the first 120 seconds, will capture some foam potentially coming off. That will give us release time, which will allow us to go back and add to the failure mode analysis. And then once we know more what this failure mode is, and then we can target a better design so the next time we can come around with a better ice frost ramp design. If we don't, and we don't get this data, we're just kind of making a change to make a change, and yeah, we think we did it right, but we know the transport from these regions is not good, and you don't want to make a change lightly in these regions. You make a change and you guessed wrong and you have ice or you have foam, you could be very much worse than where you are today. So in a lot of words, I kind of summarized a lot of the discussion that was occurring amongst the team members.
Some of that is what I said earlier. We want a better design, but we want it to be a better design. And you know, in this program and in every other spaceflight program that I've ever been associated with, there's darn sure been times where we thought we had something locked down. We were sure that the change we were going to make was better, and then we had egg on our face. So trying to avoid that here.
All right.
David Waters from Central Florida News 13. You were talking about trying to redesign there. How close are you to a redesign? What is the status of that? And then also, Mr. Gerstenmaier, when you walked over, you said there were other big issues brought to the table. Walk us through what some of the other issues were there today.
Let me take the first part of the redesign question. Steve Cash at the Marshall Space Flight Center, who's the deputy manager for the propulsion organization there, is the designated leader of the ice frost ramp redesign team. They have come forward with 3 options. They're doing some testing this month. They hope by the end of the month to down select to their lead option. Then they're going to put that in the wind tunnel and some other test fixtures to make sure that we have a good design that won't come apart. You remember we tried this before and we put it in the wind tunnel and we were not as successful as we wanted to be in terms that the foam came off that one. These designs have much less foam, in fact no foam in some areas. So we hope to have a design down selection about the time we fly Discovery that we will put into the second level of test and analysis, and hopefully we can start implementing that on tanks in the fall. So that's kind of the game plan here. And of course I need to hasten to add that if we find out significant information on this flight, we will fold that back into the design. Okay.
And I'll give you a couple of the other items we talked about. We have the trailing umbilical system reel on board space station. You'll see it on the ICC. It sits over on the right side of the cargo bay. We looked at that to be able to withstand landing loads, and we ran, I think they told me, 678 million stress cases to go look at that to certify that it is ready to go land. So if you say we were focused on other issues and we didn't spend quality time with some of these issues, this is one we clearly spent some quality time with. We still have a little bit of work to do. They still have to finish some of the final paperwork analysis, some of the final signature stuff, and that should occur next week, and we'll see that. That was one of the items. We also, as I said in the opening remarks, we talked a lot about the planning for increasing the crew size on board station to 3 and what's the criteria of when we do that and when we wouldn't do that based on what we see during the imaging and what may happen on the shuttle side. We talked a little bit about a pyrotechnic cutter that can cut a cable on the SSRMS or on the OBSS. Again, a drawing review identified for us some fasteners were not the appropriate length in that location, and we've done some testing to show that it'll perform the way it's supposed to go perform, so that's okay to go fly. We spent another issue was talking about some other fasteners on some racks that sit in the multi-purpose logistics module. We made sure that those are all okay. We reviewed in detail the main engines for this flight to make sure that their performance levels are acceptable from what we've seen before, that all the testing on those main engines is consistent with what we've seen on the ground. We reviewed the solid rocket motors to make sure that they are all ready to go and support the mission. We reviewed the tank, the pressurization valves that'll occur. We talked about our wonderful eco sensors, the engine cutoff sensors. Those are just the topics, and I could probably go on for another half hour here giving you topics, but I'll save you the pleasure of a Reader's Digest version of the meeting.
All right, next question. Let's go over here to Todd, third row.
Todd Halverson of Florida Today, I guess for Gerst. I'm curious about what the position of the external tank project office at Marshall was vis-a-vis the ice frost ramps. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the written statements that were filed by safety and the chief engineer. What exactly did they say for the record?
Okay. I guess first of all, from the external tank project at Marshall, they were go for this flight. Again, they would like us to change the ice frost ramps like we all would as soon as we can, but it was basically a go with contingent upon we redesign as soon as we can on the ice frost ramps. In terms of the other two statements, they basically, there's a form we signed, and they essentially said for this flight, from their technical positions, they were no-go, but they didn't see, they didn't have any objections to us going ahead with the decision we made. So in other words, they understood the decision that we made as a board and as a team. They accepted to an extent our rationale and didn't disagree with our rationale, but from their discipline and their position, they felt they were no-go. So again, just as we talked about allowing others to voice their opinion without restricting it, this is an excellent way to go do it. We've got, opinion is probably the wrong term, but it's to express their position from their engineering discipline without the regards to the bigger program. They were free to go do that, and that reflected the no-go piece, but then they recognized the broader discussion and our broader rationale for the flight, and they can understand that, and they didn't have an objection to us going to fly. And that's as straightforward as I can give it to you.
All right, let's go next question. Let's stay right here. Tarek.
You're Tarek Rock with Space.com and Space News, and I think I have a question for Bill Gerstenmaier. Yesterday, Commander Steve Lindsay kind of walked us through what he thought you'd be talking about in terms of, choosing July 1st or a few days later, based on what they would see on the tank with their photography. I'm curious how that actually did play out today, and did you basically decide it's not going to be worth it depending on what you get on orbit?
And basically, Wayne and the PRCB had looked at this issue in a lot more detail than we did in the flight readiness review. And what happens on July 1st, and Wayne can help me here a little bit, is there's a little shadow that comes off the 17-inch ox feed line that can shade some of the ice frost ramps back on the hydrogen side of the tank. The other ice frost ramps up on the inner tank and up on the oxygen tank are very visible in this lighted condition. But that's a function of how the tank separates from the orbiter with, I think, no tip-off rates. If there's a little bit of a tip-off rate, then that shadow may move to another location. Wayne and the team looked at it, and we agreed as a Flight Readiness Review Board that it wasn't worth waiting a couple days for that shadow to move to a different location, because then if we got unlucky and we got tip-off rates in the other direction, then we thought we were doing something good, and then the shadow drifted right back to where we didn't want it to be. So we determined the thing to do was to go for the beginning of the launch window, even though the analysis of minimal tip-off rates shows a little bit of shadow, and we will accept that on those ice frost ramps.
And the only thing I'd add to that is you got to understand this photography is not guaranteed. We've got new cameras here, and they worked great on the last flight, but we've had experiences in the past where cameras didn't work right, or the attitude, there was an attitude, I don't want to say upset, but maybe we were at the corner of our attitude control box, and there's a number of things that can cause the pictures not to come back. We really want to get these pictures. There's no guarantee any day in the launch window that you're 100% going to get these pictures. We have, in the judgment of everybody that reviewed it, a really good shot at getting them on July the 1st. We talked very briefly about June 30th, and then that probably is just a hair over the limit that we want to try to get. So the other thing we found out, looking at the shadows, of course, is that it's not, as the analysis would indicate, a pure black thing in the shadows. There's reflected light, and you can see quite a lot in some of these shadowed areas. So you roll all that together and you say, is it worth waiting until the second to get just a fraction more percent chance of guaranteeing those pictures? No, July 1st is a good day, and we recommend it to go fly.
All right, next question. Let's go right
there. Dan Billow from WESH-TV. I don't know which of you has been to the most FRRs, maybe Mike, but for any of you, how many times, if any, have you had an FRR where there were recommendations like you had today that were no-go, and then in fact you went ahead and did set the launch date and go fly? And then the second question, if I can, for Bill Gerstenmaier, how many more times in the future will you expect to have a launch on need or a backup space shuttle ready to fly in case you need it?
I'll take a shot at the first one. I've been to quite a few FRRs in my career, going back to the mid-'90s, really the early '90s.
I mentioned to the administrator walking over here today, this was the one, the best one in my perspective, from the perspective of people speaking up and speaking their mind. You hear it over and over from us. I can tell you from my perspective, it really, truly happened. Engineers, managers who had issues to present did so. They were listened to fully and fully discussed among all team members, and then decisions were made. In the old days, people would have been more reluctant to stand up and speak their mind. We have a different culture now since the Columbia accident. You've heard that a lot in the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, the culture of NASA. I can tell you it has changed, especially in the FRRs and the launch readiness reviews that we do locally, Wayne's PRCB, lots of discussion in today's environment. We're not blowing smoke. This really happens. It was a great FRR today.
More recommendations?
You know, I can recall at least one other occasion. I haven't been to nearly as many FRRs as Michael Heimbach has, but I can remember at least one where he had a no-go recommendation from the subsystem manager that we should stand down and fix things. But I think that was much less frequent, you know, than we had today. So this has really been interesting.
And then to your question about how long we're going to have orbiter launch on need, it looks like we can keep it around fairly easily in the manifest, and I think that's a smart thing to go do. So we're going to keep it around for a fair amount of time and keep it in the program.
All right, next question. Let's go back over here to Bill.
Yeah, just two quick ones from me, for anybody really. First of all, the statements that you were talking about that these guys signed, is that an exception to the COFA? Is that what you're talking about? There's no waiver involved here. It's just an exception. Is that right?
Yeah, they actually annotated on the flight readiness review forms their own words. So we gave them again the freedom to write it how they wanted to write it. So they printed right on the form, right above their signature, that says we're go for flight, what they meant by their signature.
Okay, and I guess for Mike maybe, if I had to distill this news conference down to an editor in New York who doesn't follow the shuttle, the statement that everybody would hear is, they recommended no go, but they're okay for flight. How do you explain, I mean, just take another crack at explaining that where my next door neighbor would possibly understand what you're saying, because it doesn't come out that way if you don't have context.
Well, sorry, let me try again. Some people, NASA has many different disciplines that are required to be pulled together to execute a flight. We have junior people who work those disciplines, and we have senior people who are in the end responsible for those disciplines, and then we have all levels in between. Some of the senior NASA individuals responsible for particular technical areas, particular disciplines, expressed that they would rather stand down until we had fixed the ice cross ramp the way that something better, whereas many others said no, we should go ahead. So we did not have unanimity. Therefore, a decision had to be made. Now, one possible way of making decisions is that unless everybody feels we should go, then we will stand down. In which case, I don't think, at least that for shuttle flights or any other flights, we don't need an administrator. All right? We don't actually make decisions. We just make sure that no one is unhappy. That's not the method that we're using. We enunciated a careful rationale for flying, and I gave you a piece of it in your earlier question, that I believe mitigated the concerns that were expressed by the Office of Safety and Mission Assurance and by the Office of the Chief Engineer. And in fact, they agreed with that. And the rationale fundamentally consists of what I said earlier. We have I don't want to say, and I don't want to be quoted as saying there's no ascent risk on the shuttle. There's plenty of ascent risk on the shuttle. Debris shed from the tank does not pose an ascent risk for the shuttle. Okay, it poses a risk for entry. But since we have inspection methods, we are beginning to converge on some rudimentary repair methods which may be useful. Since we have station for a safe haven, since we have the possibility of, in fact, we evaluated quite carefully, we've got an excellent capability for launch on need, and we have the Russian partners. So we have a number of mitigation strategies should the unlikely occur and we have a debris strike. Subject to those conditions, Chief Engineer and Office of Safety and Mission Assurance were okay with launch. Looking at their specific discipline area, they would recommend that we stand down. But there are larger considerations. If we stand down, now we back up shuttle assembly flights, station assembly flights for shuttle. One of the areas that was surfaced during the CABE investigations was the issue of schedule pressure on NASA. Now, schedule pressure for us is a fact of life, but it has to be balanced. I do not want to make decisions today which are going to result in having all of the schedule pressure in creating station assembly in the last year or two. I don't want to get us into a situation where by being more cautious than I think technically necessary today, we wind up having to execute 6 flights in the last year or something. That's not smart. So I'm willing, as administrator, looking at the whole picture, I'm willing to take a little bit of programmatic risk now, and you'll notice I did not say crew risk. I'm willing to take some programmatic risk now in order to prevent an excessive buildup of programmatic risk later on. This is, in fact, what you pay me to do. The Chief Engineer and the Office of Safety and Mission Assurance are not paid to worry about schedule risk 4 years in the future. They're paid to worry about what is the situation with this particular flight. We had their input. In fact, both of them are long and valued friends of mine and people whom I have nothing but the greatest technical respect for. I mean, I think that goes without saying. But I cannot possibly accept every recommendation which I am given by every member of my staff, especially since they don't all agree. I don't know, Bill, I don't know how to say it any more clearly. I'm sorry. I'm really doing the best I can here.
And I think, again, simply the Flight Readiness Review Board as a whole was go, but then within that go, there was differing opinions about what that go really means. And again, the important thing was the discussion, that everybody got to understand everybody else's opinion, and then as a collective group, this is what we're going to go do.
All right, next question. Let's go to Jay.
Dr. Griffin, your rationale is well understood, and I'm sure that if you could fix everything that needs fixing on the space shuttle within 6 months and make it absolutely 100% safe, you would do it. But that's a job that obviously cannot be done 25 years after this machine's been flying. I want to go back to what you said a while ago. God forbid if we have another loss in these last 16 or 18 flights. Is that cut and dried the end of Shuttle, and then we go on to Constellation?
Leaving aside the issue of crew, we are trying, of course, to protect crew, and I've made that quite clear, and I don't believe we're taking a crew risk. Okay, if we were to lose another vehicle, I will tell you right now that I would be moving to figure out a way to shut the program down. I think at that point we're done. I'm sorry if that sounds too blunt for some, but that's where I am. Now we're trying to navigate, some very difficult waters for the next 16 flights to get the station assembled. I think it's worth doing. I've stated that on multiple occasions, but we know it's not easy.
All right, we have time for a few more questions, if there are any questions. And we'll go with Mike.
Given July 1st.
There doesn't have to be any questions. I don't want to prod you guys.
Does this improve the likelihood of the third spacewalk? Do you think it will happen?
Well, let me address that. I think that we have got the second tank here at the Kennedy Space Center. It's in VAB. We're, as you know, changing out our famous engine cutoff sensors to make sure we have good sensors there, and it's going to be a little tight for us to get that guy ready to go at the end of August, but I think we're going to make it. We're certainly going to make a run for it. We have a little bit more than a 2-week launch window at the end of August and the first part of September. So barring a major hurricane in the central Florida area, I think we have a really good shot at getting the second flight off in that launch window. The third flight, the tank is coming out of Michoud. We reviewed the schedules for the production of that tank. They have been able to find some production efficiencies that brought that schedule to the left, and now it supports the date that it needs to be shipped to arrive here to support a December 14th launch. The orbiter processing will be interesting to watch with the turn Discovery around. Frankly, I think that's going to be a bit of a challenge, but the long pole is the tank, and given that the tank production schedule supports, barring some unforeseen circumstance, I really think that we have a really good shot at getting 3 flights off this year. And we'll be back down here. Let me see, if we launch on the 14th, that'll land right around Christmas, maybe a couple of days after, and we'll have a wonderful Christmas in Florida.
Wouldn't be my first time.
That'd be great.
All right. David Waters from Central Florida News 13. You briefly mentioned rescue shuttle. What's the new estimate these days of time between that being called up and being able to launch?
Well, in fact, on this flight, we have quite a bit of margin. We would call that up about 10 days into the flight if we had problems that we knew, potentially earlier, but no later than that far into the flight, if we had problems that we knew would prevent us from returning the shuttle. Atlantis is well on track. I think, Mike, it was 47 days after call-up that we could get off, 41, and we have about 82 days capability on board the station. So
yeah, that's about right. We're showing a launch date of August the 21st, if that becomes necessary, and if we get the decision in time. And that's well within the CSCS capability of the station, as I understand. All right. Any more questions before we wrap up? All right. Appreciate everybody joining us today. That'll conclude today's post-flight readiness review press conference. Have a great afternoon, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
The spacecraft has been grounded for a year for repairs after chunks of foam broke away during its previous launch. The same fault occurred 3 years ago on the Shuttle Columbia, which broke up as it returned to Earth, killing 7 astronauts.
Raumfahrtbehörde NASA plant für den 1. Juli erneut einen Start der Raumfähre Discovery. Mit an Bord soll auch der deutsche Astronaut Thomas Reiter sein, der ein halbes Jahr lang auf der Internationalen Raumstation forschen soll. Der Testflug wäre der erste seit knapp einem Jahr und erst der zweite Flug nach der Columbia-Katastrophe im Jahr 2003. Sorge bereiten nach Einschätzung von Sicherheitsexperten nach wie vor die Außentanks des Shuttles. Beim letzten Discovery-Start im vergangenen Juli war ein Stück Isolierschaum abgebrochen. Die NASA nahm daraufhin aerodynamische Veränderungen an den Tanks vor.
Sicherheitsexperten warnen zwar, aber dennoch soll die Raumfähre Discovery am 1. Juli wie geplant starten. Es wäre der erste Flug seit knapp einem Jahr und erst der zweite nach der Columbia-Katastrophe 2003, bei der alle 7 Astronauten starben. Auch aus deutscher Sicht ist der Shuttle-Flug spannend, denn zur Besatzung gehört auch unser Mann, Thomas Reiter.
Es bleibt ein Risiko. Im Juli soll sie wieder in den Himmel steigen nach einer langen Pleiten-, Pech- und Pannenserie. Dabei sind längst nicht alle Probleme geklärt. Beim letzten Discovery-Start war erneut ein Stück Isolierschaum abgebrochen. Das Resultat Stunden voller Angst beim Rückflug. Denn 2003 hatte ebenso ein Stück Isolierschaum zum Absturz der Columbia und zum Tod von 7 Astronauten geführt. Diesmal soll alles besser klappen, so richtig sicher ist man sich aber nicht. Einige der NASA-Verantwortlichen hätten lieber noch gewartet, bis alle Probleme gelöst sind. Andere sagten, nein, wir müssen jetzt los. Wir waren uns uneinig und eine Entscheidung musste getroffen werden. Lange haben sie ihn zappeln lassen. Mit der Discovery soll endlich auch der deutsche Astronaut Thomas Reiter mitfliegen. Als erster Deutscher ist er für anstrengende und schwierige Außenbordeinsätze vorgesehen. Genug Erfahrung für den Spacewalk hat er. Für die Russen ist er bereits mehrfach durchs All spaziert.
Es ist eine Knochenarbeit in diesen Raumanzügen. Mein Außenbordeinsatz hat 6 Stunden gedauert und als wir zurückkamen, wir mussten erst mal ein bisschen was trinken. Man schwitzt extrem stark. Und wenn man 8 Stunden draußen war, also da ist man froh, wenn man erst mal verschnaufen kann. Und ich glaube, da ist es menschlich, dass man dann auch mal flucht, wenn so eine Schraube nicht reingeht.
Damit die Mission nicht baden geht, hat die NASA einige neue Sicherheitschecks vorgesehen. Von der ISS aus wird die Außenhaut des Shuttles genau gescannt. Immerhin, die Techniker halten den 23 Jahre alten Flieger für so sicher wie noch nie. Kein Grund zur Sorge also.
You'll hear that there were many different viewpoints on the issue of whether we were ready to fly or not. We've decided that we are.
Well, some managers say the shuttle still needs more work before the mission can blast off. This Discovery launch will be the second manned shuttle to venture into space since the Columbia disaster back in 2003. All 7 astronauts were killed when Columbia disintegrated shortly before it was scheduled to land.
Good morning. It's great to be here. I'm Steve Lindsay, commander of STS-121, and we just flew from the Cape. Yesterday we went into quarantine on Saturday night down in Houston. Just finished our last little bit of training yesterday, and we're down here for the rest of the time, and hopefully we'll be airborne on Saturday. And so I'd just like to let each of the crew come up, say a few words, and then we're going to press into crew quarters for a little bit more work and relaxation before we get ready to launch this thing.
I'm Mark Kelly, the pilot. It's great to be here. Here, Discovery's ready to go, and we're ready to go as well. Hopefully we'll have some great weather on Saturday.
Hi, I'm Mike Fossum, MS-1 and EV-2, and it's great to be here. We got a little look at the pad as we're flying in today, and we've been training long, and we're glad to be here. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Lisa Nowak. I'm MS-2, and I'll be doing a lot of the robotics on the flight. And it is really great to finally be here in Florida for the launch. Thanks for being here to see us.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Wilson. I'm MS-3, and I'll be involved with the robotics and transfer for this mission. And after having our practice countdown test, it is really good to be back here and finally do this for real. We're looking forward to it.
Hello, I'm Piers Sellers. I'll be doing spacewalking, computers, and looking after the food. And we're looking, I'm hoping the weather's going to improve a little bit in the next few days, and we'll get off on time. And it's great to be here at last for the real thing.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Thomas Reiter. I'm MS-5, and I'm the one who will be left behind on the station after years and years of training. I think this is a remarkable moment, coming close to launch, and I think we all are confident that our launch will signify the continuation of the assembly of the station, returning to a 3-man crew and using or utilizing the station for its purpose. I'm supposed to say a few words also in a few other languages. I choose German. Ja, meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren, es ist eine tolle Sache, nach vielen Jahren des Trainings so nah vor dem Start zu sein. Ich denke, dass dieser Start ein Zeichen dafür sein wird, dass der Aufbau der Station weiter voranschreiten wird. Wir werden mit einer 3-köpfigen Crew die Bestimmung der Station natürlich erfüllen können, weite Forschung ausführen können und natürlich die Station für den Empfang unseres europäischen Forschungsmoduls Columbus vorzubereiten. Es ist schön, hier zu sein.
Well, thank you all for coming today, and like everybody has said, we're really excited to be here, ready to go do this for real. We've been training for a long time. We're prepared as we're going to be. We're ready to go. The vehicle is ready. I talked to Jim Keddy this morning. The vehicle's looking real good, and everything's looking go. So weather permitting, which I'm pretty confident in, we're going to be airborne on July 1st, and hopefully you guys will be watching then. So y'all have a good afternoon, and we'll be seeing you.
the Kennedy Space Center. This is Shuttle Launch Control, where our countdown clock stands at 1 day, 19 hours, or T-minus 43 hours, for launch of Space Shuttle Discovery on STS-121. The Kennedy Space Center launch team had their call to stations about 25 minutes ago in the newly renovated Firing Room 4 of the Launch Control Center, and they are on station ready to begin the countdown at precisely 5 o'clock. The countdown includes nearly 28 hours of built-in hold time, leading to a preferred launch time at 3:49 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on Saturday, July 1st. Based on that time, the launch window will extend for 5 minutes. This mission is the 115th shuttle flight and the 18th U.S. flight to the International Space Station. Discovery's mission, designated STS-121, is scheduled to last about 12 days with a planned landing at 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time on July 13th at the Kennedy Space Center Shuttle Landing Facility. We're looking now at a picture of Space Shuttle Discovery on Launch Pad 39B, where preparations are underway for the upcoming loading of cryogenic reactants into the onboard storage spheres. This is a view of one of the solid rocket boosters attached to Space Shuttle Discovery's external tank, and up against the Space Shuttle is the rotating service structure, which is the primary access to the Space Shuttle, providing weather protection as well as the ability of all of the technicians and engineers to access Discovery up until the time that the rotating surface structure is retracted, which at this time is planned to occur at 7 p.m. on Friday night. The main activity coming up once the countdown begins is the final closeouts for launch. They will begin both on Space Shuttle Discovery and on Launch Pad 39B, which also takes a lot of activity to prepare the pad itself for launch. There'll be a review of flight software stored in the mass memory units and the display systems on Discovery, and all of the backup flight software will be loaded into Discovery's general purpose computers tonight. At 1 a.m., the work will begin to remove the mid-deck and flight deck platforms between the two compartments and complete final preparations to load the power reactant storage distribution system. And also at 6 a.m. there will be a test of the navigational aids. The actual loading of the cryogenic reactants will begin at 9 a.m. with the clearing of the launch pad of all non-essential personnel. We're now approximately 1 minute from the pickup of the countdown for STS-121. The activity for loading cryogenic reactants, which begins tomorrow, will conclude late tomorrow evening at about 9 or 9:30. The actual loading of the reactants into the fuel cell storage tanks, which are located beneath Discovery's payload bay, will begin at 2:30 p.m. We're now about 45 seconds from picking up the countdown of STS-121. The astronauts are here at the Kennedy Space Center, where they arrived on Tuesday in their T-38s and have been busy reviewing their flight plans and being briefed on the status of Space Shuttle Discovery and its payloads. 20 seconds now from picking up the countdown for STS-121. Activity going on in Firing Room 4. 10 seconds now. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. T-minus 1 day, 19 hours, and counting. Countdown has begun for the launch of Space Shuttle Discovery on Saturday, leading to liftoff at 3:49 p.m. 7-member crew and several payloads will ride aboard Discovery to dock with the International Space Station. 2 mission specialists will perform 2 planned spacewalks during the 12-day mission. During these spacewalks, crew members will continue to test new equipment and procedures that increase Space Shuttle safety for the remainder of the shuttle program. These include testing techniques for inspecting and repairing reinforced carbon-carbon samples that protect the shuttle's nose cone and its wing leading edges. They will also perform some special tests on the 50-foot robotic arm, as well as transfer equipment, supplies, and hardware from the multi-purpose module Leonardo. Once we get to the day before launch on Friday, the critical activities to be performed will be filling the sound suppression water system tank with water at the launch pad. This floods the pad with water at the rate of 900,000 gallons a minute, beginning at 16 seconds before launch. The tail service masts, which are the umbilicals connecting to the shuttle, will be closed out. There will be final functional checks of the star tracker. The orbiter's inertial measurements units will be activated, as will the communication systems. The final stowage of the crew's personal effects will be done on about 2:50 p.m. is when final stowage is set to begin, and then the rotating surface structure will be retracted by 7 p.m. on Friday night. On launch day, the crew will be awakened and have breakfast shortly after 10 a.m. and then proceed to the suit-up room where they will suit up in their launch and entry suits for the trip to Pad 39B. The countdown clock now ticking. All activities are on schedule for a liftoff at 3:49 p.m. on Saturday. Countdown operations being controlled from Firing Room 4 of the Launch Control Center at KSC. And at this time we have a 40% chance of having acceptable launch weather criteria on Saturday, primarily due to the effects of thunderstorms which may be in the local area or could be inland with their anvil tops blowing off toward Kennedy Space Center, and anvil clouds are something through which in most cases we will not launch because those can be charged. So we're into a fairly typical summertime afternoon thunder shower pattern, and a lot will depend on the timing of when these showers begin and where they begin to spring up. But as far as Space Shuttle Discovery is concerned, it is ready, and the launch team is ready for launch on Saturday. So with the countdown clock now standing at 1 day, 18 hours, 56 minutes, and counting, this is Shuttle Launch Control. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first countdown status briefing for STS-121. And here to bring us the status today is Jeff Spaulding, NASA Test Director. Debbie Hahn, the STS-121 KSC Payload Manager. And Kathy Winters, the Shuttle Weather Officer from the Department of the Air Force.
Good morning.
And we'll begin first with the launch vehicle status and countdown with Jeff Spaulding. Jeff?
Thank you, George. And good morning, everyone. I'm pleased to be back here today after about a one-year absence to provide STS-121 launch countdown status for the upcoming mission of the Space Shuttle Discovery. as we return to the International Space Station. The Shuttle Discovery is in excellent shape as we continue all of our preparations towards Saturday's launch to bring the multi-purpose logistics module to the orbiting space station and then returning her crew safely home. Our flight crew did arrive yesterday, and they're in great spirits, and I know they're as excited as we are to get back to flying. Right now we're tracking no issues in our preparations at this point, and our aft and mid-body of the orbiter are closed out for flight and ready to go. And our remaining preparations for the launch countdown are for the most part complete, and we'll wrap those up as the day goes on. Our launch countdown call to stations is at 4:30 this afternoon. The countdown clock will then pick up at 5 o'clock, and at that point we'll begin checking out some of our avionics systems and working through all of our preparations towards the loading of the onboard reactants. And that operation is scheduled for Thursday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and that'll wrap up about 9 o'clock tomorrow evening. On Friday, we do begin the checkout of our orbiter ground and communication networks, and that operation is going to start about 1 o'clock. And we'll continue preparations throughout the day in anticipation of the retraction of the rotating service structure, which is currently scheduled for 7 p.m. on Friday. And then we will finalize all of our pad preparations in anticipation of the exploding of the external tank, which is scheduled to begin just prior to 6 a.m. on Saturday morning. Our launch window is approximately 10 minutes in length. It does open at 3:43 p.m. on Saturday. We do sync up with the actual T0 time based on all of our day of launch parameters during our T-9 minute hold. We generally target the middle of the window and that 10-minute window because that gives us the maximum capability for any abort contingencies. And what that does is it correlates back to that 3:48 time frame, which I think most of you are aware of from our launch time. The mission is a 12-day mission. We do have one possible mission extension day if there are available propellants for us. There are 2 planned weather contingency days as always. 2 EVAs are also planned for the mission, and a third one would be planned if in fact we do get that additional extension day. Our landing is currently planned for approximately 10:45 on the morning of July the 13th. As far as our scrub turnaround plans go, we do have liquid hydrogen as our limiting factor of 5 days, and liquid oxygen is 12. And that does give us our standard 24 and 48-hour scrub turnaround capabilities. And it also means that I can get a maximum of 4 launch attempts in 5 days before we'd have to stand down and reservice our onboard reactants. The overall launch window for July extends from July the 1st through the 19th. If we don't get off the ground during that time frame, we would stand down until August the 28th, and then that window extends through September the 14th. As far as the range goes, it is open all the way through our launch window in the month of July. In summary, our teams have been working tirelessly during the last year to help make this shuttle flight and all of our shuttle flights obviously as safely as possible for the crews. As we approach our nation's 230th birthday, I'm proud to announce that the launch vehicle, the launch and flight teams and flight crew are ready to launch and continue our mission of completing the space station. Thanks, George.
Thank you, Jeff. And now to Debbie Hahn, the STS-121 KSC Payload Manager. Debbie?
Good morning. The space station elements have been loaded into the orbiter payload bay a few months earlier, and the only work remaining on the International Space Station is the actual installation of the mid-decks, which will come at L-27. This payload complement will consist of the multi-purpose logistics module, which was given to NASA by the Italian Space Agency and will be loaded with over 2 tons of cargo that we're bringing to station. A lot of that cargo are going to be crew supplies, it's equipment and spares, but we're also bringing the oxygen generation system, which is going to enable our extended crew capability to 6. And we're also bringing 2 experiment facilities to orbit, the -80 degrees freezer, which will help with our cargo stowage activities for specimens. And lastly, we're taking an express transportation rack, which is bringing up our European modular cultivation system, which is going to help support plant biology science on orbit. So basically, we have a multi-purpose logistics module that is filled volumetrically to go to station. We actually also have 2 carriers on this mission. One is carrying critical spares, the truss umbilical system, reel assembly. The second is a pump module. And the last carrier is bringing up a test objective to study repair techniques for the shuttle's thermal protection system. So that's a small summary of the payload complement and our mission on orbit to station. I think that's it, George.
All right, thank you, Debbie. And now to the launch weather forecast for Saturday, and Shuttle Weather Officer Kathy Winters. Kathy?
Okay, we're definitely going to be dealing with some afternoon thunderstorms the next few days. We do have the Bermuda high pressure ridge down to our south. What that does is it puts us in some southwesterly flow. And so each day we've been dealing with some afternoon storms. We had some yesterday and we're expecting some again today. As we get to launch day, that ridge will actually move back up to the north, which will improve our weather here along the coast. The only problem is those thunderstorms, even though they'll be pushing inland, we'll be seeing the anvils come back from those thunderstorms, and those are also dangerous when it comes to triggering a lightning strike. So our main concern is going to be those anvils coming back from those thunderstorms. We also have an inverted trough, little wave out to our west also, and a lot of Caribbean moisture coming in. And because of that, we could also see some isolated showers and cumulus clouds in the area of the launch pad and also within 20 nautical miles of the shuttle landing facility. So those are our main concerns for launch. Looking at the satellite picture, you can see that we have some little bit of shower activity offshore. We don't have any weather in the area just yet. We are expecting to set up our sea breeze zone and start seeing some thunderstorm development along the coast here today. For our tanking forecast for Saturday morning, we're looking for a chance for coastal showers in the area. And we just have a slight chance of getting a thunderstorm that morning because we do shift to an easterly flow pattern, and that sometimes can happen in the morning. So we do have a 10% chance of violating tanking constraints. For our launch forecast, we expect the thunderstorm to develop with the sea breeze and push inland. And again, we'll be watching for the anvils coming in from the west. Also, we could see some isolated showers and cumulus clouds. So we do have a 60% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch on launch day. For the solid rocket booster recovery forecast, just looking for scattered skies for the ships and isolated showers and thunderstorms in the area, but nothing that's a showstopper. Seas just 2 to 3 feet, so overall decent weather for them. And for the CONUS sites, we do have a ceiling at Northrop Field at 25,000 feet and a slight chance of thunderstorms within 30 there. And Edwards is a little windy, but we aren't expecting to violate any constraints for Edwards. And for the TAL sites, for Zaragoza, the weather looks good overall, just a slight chance of a thunderstorm within 20 nautical miles. And weather's good at Maroon, and for France, also concerned about thunderstorms within 20 nautical miles. If we do happen to delay 24 hours, we're basically looking at the same weather pattern here at KSC. So again, a 60% chance of KSC weather prohibiting launch. And also at the CONUS sites, we are expecting a ceiling at 25,000 feet at Edwards. And again, a little bit windy there, but no constraints violated. And a ceiling at Northrop Field at 12,000 feet with a chance of thunderstorms within 30 nautical miles. And for the TAL sites, we do have a slight chance of thunderstorms within 20 nautical miles, both at Zaragoza and also in France. And finally, for our 48-hour forecast, if we do happen to delay again, a very similar weather pattern with the easterly flow and the showers, again, and the anvils coming in from the west. So we do have a 60% chance, again, of KSC weather prohibiting launch. And for the CONUS sites, again, still a little bit windy at Edwards, but not violating any constraints, and we do have a chance for thunderstorms within 30 nautical miles at White Sands Missile Range. And finally, for the TAL sites, we are looking at a ceiling at Zaragoza at 9,000 feet with a chance of showers within 20, and also for France, a chance for thunderstorms within 20 nautical miles. So overall, we'll be watching the weather here closely at KSC, and looking good, though, at least at one TAL site for each location, and at the CONUS sites, at least one CONUS site. And that's all I have, George.
All right, thank you, Kathy. And we're ready now to take questions. Please give your name and your affiliation when the microphone comes to you. And we'll start over here with Bill.
Hi, it's Bill Harwood of CBS for Kathy. Your percentage numbers don't include SMGs or TLS. Is that right? I just want to make sure when I write about this that I'm being accurate, because I think they're no-go all 3 days, aren't they?
Right, but actually it does include that, and that does include the probability includes both the weather for the launch pad and the weather for the shuttle landing facility.
Thanks.
Yes.
Another question for Mark.
Mark Carreau from the Houston Chronicle. I had a couple of weather questions. Is the pattern we're seeing here, is this seasonal for this time of year? I mean, is this unexpected, or is this sort of an expected set of conditions?
It is an expected set of conditions. The one thing that's slightly different for Saturday
and for Sunday and Monday is that there's a lot of moisture coming in with this easterly flow, and there's also that inverted trough off to our west. Usually when we get an easterly flow, the thunderstorms tend to migrate more towards the west coast of Florida, but because of that inverted trough, rather than the thunderstorms kind of clearing out in the afternoon and the weather clearing out, sometimes we can continue to have some isolated showers coming in from offshore just due to that inverted trough. So it's not out of the norm per se, but if it was just easterly flow we were dealing with, that would be a little bit better conditions. But with that added fly in the ointment, that added little trough off to the west, we have a little bit more concerns for the showers. And then the upper level winds are really what's hurting us on the end gulf.
For a 48-hour turnaround, but is there a break in this pattern that you see at this time? Anything in the models, or if you were going out another 24 hours to 72 or 96, would it basically be the same forecast at this point?
It actually it starts to transition as we get into midweek next week. We would actually shift back to a southwesterly flow. If that occurred, then that would actually give us a higher chance for KFC weather prohibiting launch. So this is actually a little bit better situation than what we're going to get into if we go to Wednesday and beyond of next week.
Thank you. Todd?
Yeah, for Jeff Spalding, given the weather forecast for the next several days and given the fact that there's a desire to get the extension day, what is the strategy going to be from the shuttle program for making a decision to either proceed with the launch attempt Saturday or perhaps wait a day or whatever?
I think, as always, if we have an opportunity to launch, the management team will sit down and make an evaluation, and we'll make a go at trying to get off the ground. That's always our plan, and that's always our best plan, to try to get off if we have an opportunity. Obviously, these forecasts, while they sound a little bit gloomy, we've certainly launched with higher predictions of no-goes, et cetera. So, as always, we'll evaluate the weather real time and make the decisions on day of launch.
Tarek?
Thank you. Tarek Malik with Space.com and Space News for Jeff. I'm curious, kind of on the human side, with the countdown set to start. What is that feeling there in the room, with you and your team, and what are you looking forward to, as the clock starts ticking down today?
Well, I think the team has been excited and kind of anxious to get into the launch countdown. Often we start the launch countdowns on Monday, and this time we're starting on a Wednesday, so we had a couple of more days to think about it and work some preparations. And during that time frame, I think that the team has gotten a little more anxious to get into the count. As we work through all of the items getting to this point, I think everybody's been excited looking at the end result to getting to this point throughout the entire flow. So I think people have been excited. They still continue to be. They've worked hard to get us to this point over the last year, and specifically since we've rolled out to the pad. I think people have done a great job getting this vehicle ready, and it is ready to launch.
Let's come up here to Irene.
Thanks. Irene Klotz with Reuters. I have a few questions. I think for Debbie, is there anything been added kind of late to the manifest to fly to the station? In particular, like a replacement of the foot restraint that got lost on the last station spacewalk or anything?
The last thing we've had added to the manifest to go to station has been the trailing umbilical system, and it was manifested in the January time frame. We basically have had our manifested solid here since January. We're not carrying up any new items. The last thing to be manifested has been something that is going to support the orbiter tile repair system, affectionately called TRAD. And they're trying to get manifested as we speak to be loaded into the mid-decks. And I think Jeff can expand on the function of TRAD.
Well, the TRAD is an ablator tile repair system, and they're having a discussion this morning, as Debbie mentioned, to determine whether we're going to manifest that or not. They did all the preparations to get us to this point to see where we were, and then we're going to make that decision this morning based on what the management team comes up with from the line of work. It's a repair tool from a tile perspective. It's something that the astronauts could use, although it is not gone through all of the certification processes at this point. It would be an evaluation tool as of right now, but it would be available to the flight crew if needed on orbit, if in fact it is manifested.
So that would just be a tool for the two tile materials that are available. Yes. So and I had another question for you. Could you talk a little bit about the new cameras and radars that are changed since the 114 flight, where they're going to be, and if it's are they going to be more real-time available, or is it something that you're going to need to go and retrieve film or video from?
Well, I'll talk about the vehicle ones. We do have a couple new cameras on the solid rocket boosters. Okay, well, we do have a couple on the boosters themselves, which are just adding to our complement. Those are not real-time cameras. They'll be recorded, and we'll recover that video post-launch. As far as on the ground, we've made very few changes to our trackers and to our cameras and radars at this point. We'll still essentially have the same type of complement that we've had in the past. As far as our long-range trackers, we still have 10 of those. We have some 7 medium and then close-in trackers as well. So we will have our full complement of trackers available to us. We do go in afterwards, retrieve that film based on priorities, and there's a plan in place to do all of that. And then that data evaluation and imagery evaluation, while extensive, does take a little bit of time to get through that. We do have some initial stuff we do immediately following launch, but from some of our real-time cameras. But through a lot of the trackers, it's a recovery that we have to go do and do that evaluation.
Do you have a total number of ground cameras and video cameras?
I will get that number for you, so I don't make sure I miss any that are out there.
Thanks.
We're here to Mike.
Hi, Mike Schneider, Associated Press. I had a question for Jeff. You could just explain the correlation between the number of times you will be able to fuel and how that affects the decision on whether an extra day can be added to the mission.
As far as the fueling process, right now it depends on how many days of hold time that we use at the pad. And I think we're at 40, we can go to 48 hours and still make an extension day. There's still things they can do on orbit to still preserve the extension day as required, which is part of our normal plans on orbit as we try to conserve propellant and those types of things. It's not a fixed number per se, but as always, and as I mentioned, we are still going to maintain our capability to try to go 4 launch attempts before we would stand down and top off any of our commodities. And that's our maximum amount of time that we can do that. We'd try to stand down one day and then try 2 more attempts, which is 4 attempts in 5 days. And that plan is still in place as it has been from the beginning.
And then also, the fact that you haven't done this for almost a year, does that make it more difficult? Is there an element of rustiness you have to shake off since you haven't done this for a while?
Well, I'll speak to the launch team, and our launch team has continuously through this period from STS-114 and even before STS-114 during that period when we weren't launching, gone through extensive training and simulations through all of our team, and essentially a process by which we went through and revalidated all of the personnel's certifications that were required to support the launch countdown. So we've gone through a very large number and continuously through all of the time frames on a repetitive scale and all of that the simulation training.
Let's go back here in the third row to Kevin.
Kevin Oliver with WFTV. Have the afternoon thunderstorms slowed down any of the launch preparations, any of the work out at the pad? I don't know if you've had to pull people off the pad yesterday or plan to today.
Well, we do have in place, we do have all of our normal safing and securing for any type of weather that may be severe in the area, and those procedures are all laid out and documented. People can continue to work at various locations within the pad that are under the catenary wire system, for example, during certain lightning advisories and things like that. Now, we will, as always, use common sense where there still makes sense to continue operations based on the contents of the work and the personnel's exposure to, winds and rains and those types of things, and we'll take human factors into account. But the procedures are pretty specific as to what's allowed and what's not based on those types of things.
Another question I had, are the fruit flies already on board, or when do they get on this?
The fruit flies are not on board. They'll go on at L-26.
Right at the bottom cabin here.
Hey, Andrew Merritt with the Palm Beach Post. A question for Mr. Spalding. Slightly different topic. Can you talk a little bit about vultures, the risk they pose to the flight, and what steps you're taking to minimize that?
Well, we have put in a couple of things into place since STS-114 as far as some of our bird abatement program that we enlisted after the flight of STS-114. We've done deterrence to try to persuade the birds to not want to be in the areas around here at KSC and at the launch pads. Of course, we are in a National Wildlife Refuge, so it is a good home to the vultures, as you know, and other birds. We have a large number of birds here in our wildlife refuge. But we have done some things from a deterrent perspective as far as food reduction. We have a system in place by which we go and pick up carrion and things like that to kind of minimize their foods and have them look for food elsewhere and make the population density, reduce that population density in the area here at KSC. And that's been fairly successful from that portion. We are, for launch date, also doing some trapping and releasing of vultures. That plan will be in place for STS-121. And we also do have now an opportunity to hold that we did not have for STS-114 built in. And what that is we're going to have some tracking in place through a bird radar system. It's pretty standard to what we've seen in airports and other flight facilities and those types of things, and that'll be available to us. And we can look at bird densities and the consistency of the bird paths and things like that. And that we'll use that data to make a call whether we need to hold or not on launch day.
Just one quick follow-up. Can you just discuss what the risk is of having one strike the shuttle during liftoff or what have you?
Well, it would be very specific as to where and if it struck the vehicle. Certain areas are more sensitive than others, and as we went through STS-114, we had a lot of discussion about the RCC panels, about nose cap on the vehicle, some of those sensitive areas. There are other areas that are also sensitive on the vehicle. Of course, our thermal protection system is always sensitive to debris and those types of things, and we've done an extensive analysis on allowables and tried to minimize all of that on the vehicles. To minimize any possibility of debris damage to those critical areas. Obviously, a bird would represent a fairly large debris object, and depending on where it hit, it may or may not be significant to the vehicle itself. So we would make that evaluation.
Back over here, Mark, he has a follow-up.
Thank you, Mark Carrero from the Houston Chronicle. I think these are for Jeff. They're kind of three related questions. If you were into the countdown and you had to reload the PRSD, how many days does that take?
If I do one commodity, for example, right now my hydrogen is the first one I would come across 5 days. I need a minimum 48 hours to do that for one commodity.
Okay, and how long if you need both?
I beg your pardon?
To change both the hydrogen or replenish hydrogen.
If you do both at the same time, it takes 72 hours. Okay. But there is a pretty good separation between that 5 and 12 days, meaning they wouldn't overlap until we got out to that 12-day time frame for liquid oxygen.
And I wanted to make sure I understood the 13-day decision point. Does that mean that if you launched on Monday, do you automatically then still have a good chance at 13 days without a whole lot of power down operations on the shuttle, or is it Saturday and Sunday and then you sort of lose the a clear opportunity for the 13th day?
And I'm going to have to re-verify exactly how much time that we have, because I'm doing it by memory at this point, and I want to make sure that my memory is not failing me today. So, but let me re-verify that number for you, and I'll get it back to you.
Okay, and I just had one more. Would you guys hesitate to use all 10 minutes, which I know isn't very much, but I mean, do you, if the situation gives you some shot or no shot, would you go at a time other than the middle of the window?
We've had a lot of discussions about that. Right now, there are no planned or known events that we know of that would drive us to the beginning of the window, although it is available to us, on any given day. But right now, we would plan to go to the middle of the window because it does give us a lot of additional things, and if needed, we would weigh it against those benefits that we get by going to the middle of the window.
WDBO for Jeff. Can you just talk about a little bit about the difficulties that the astronauts will face if they have to stand down on Saturday, and then if they have to stand down again on Sunday? Does it make their mission more difficult to have to go through this sort of roller coaster ride, if you will, of being ready and then not going?
Well, I think this crew and you know, of course, the pilot and commander are veterans. They're very seasoned, and they've gone through a lot of training, and I think they understand. And in fact, when we've spoken with them, they understand very clearly the role is to get off the ground in whatever time available, and they are ready to go on whatever date that it turns out to be. It is a little bit of a, you know, more work for them to come in, you know, day in and day out, but I think to them it's just part of their job and it's routine to them, and they've done it for so long in training that I think any opportunity they have to launch, that they're excited about being at the launch pad.
Hi, Rory O'Neill with Metro Networks. You guys have killed my holiday weekend, having me come in on a Saturday. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are, or if you have any, about launching on an Independence Day weekend and sort of working when everyone else is going to be at a barbecue.
Well, from my perspective, I mean, that's my job, and I love my job. My job is launching space shuttles, and I mean, it doesn't get any better than that. And even the chance to launch a space shuttle through this holiday weekend or even on July 4th, I think it says a lot to the nation. It says a lot to the people and to the effort out here. And the people at this Space Center specifically, I know, have always made sacrifices to the space program. They live and breathe it every single day. And I think they will continue to do so, and there's been no complaints, and I don't think that there will be.
Bill. Todd and Mark's question for Jeff. Have you guys discussed yet or made a decision on whether or not you would attempt 3 in a row?
We've had some discussion. We have not made the final decision. Right now, it does not look likely, but of course, that is an option to us as well.
Thanks.
Right, Irene would be the last one.
Thanks also for Jeff. Could you talk a little bit about the damage that was done on the next fuel tank, the Atlantis tank, where exactly that occurred? I know it's very minor, but I didn't ever get a clear description of where it was, although it seemed to be on the fairly high up on the tank and on the side that's facing the orbiter, which didn't sound really good. Can you talk about that, and if there's any concerns at all that the tank wouldn't be ready for a CSCS flight?
Right now, there are no concerns with that tank being available to us for CSCS. As far as the specifics on the nature of the damage, I can get you some more details on that. It was minor in its description, as you had indicated, and but it is also at this point no constraint or no issue to the CSCS border at launch on need.
Thanks. And I also had one other follow-up on the bird abatement. I understand there's an audio recording that you have available to convince the birds to go someplace else shortly before launch. When would that actually be broadcast? And could you describe a little bit what the sounds are, unless you want to do an impersonation? And also, would that be audible at the press site?
The audio portion that you're speaking of is determined to be ineffective, really, for the birds in its current configuration, and we have no intent to use it on launch day. Based on our speaker configuration at the pad and the testing that we've done, it's shown that even though the sounds in testing and not in the field, but in other testing have shown that they've worked well, have not worked in this particular situation. And it's primarily because we don't have the loudness and the direction ability of the speakers to warrant using it and just to scare off the birds, essentially. So we are not going to use it.
You're not using it. Okay, thanks.
All right, that will conclude our questions and our countdown status briefing for today. We will have another one tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Thank you for coming.